The Labour Party, the party that in 2023 produced the most electrifying presidential campaign Nigeria had seen in a generation. The party that turned millions of young Nigerians into first-time voters. The party that came third nationally but first in hearts. That party today is an empty shell. Peter Obi is gone. The senators are gone. The structure is fractured beyond recognition. And while everyone is asking what happened to the Labour Party, nobody is asking the more dangerous question: who decided it should happen, and when exactly was that decision made? Just days ago, Senator Aminu Tambuwal, now of the ADC, sat before journalists in Sokoto, and on his alleged that one of the conditions attached to a deliberate plan to weaken both the PDP and the Labour Party was that Peter Obi must not remain in the Labour Party to contest in 2027. He didn't say this happened recently. He said the process started over 2 years ago. So the question that should be keeping you up at night is this: if the plan to remove Peter Obi from Labour started 2 years ago, who drew up that plan? Who executed it? And are they still in place today? Before we go further, if you are new here, this channel exists for one reason: to give Nigerians the political analysis mainstream media is too afraid or too compromised to deliver. Hit subscribe and stay with me. This gets deeper. Let's start with what actually happened, not the version you've seen on the timelines. On Thursday, March 13, 2026, Senator Aminu Tambuwal addressed journalists in Sokoto, and the occasion was his own recent defection from the PDP to the African Democratic Congress. And on the surface, that was the story Nigerian media ran with: another opposition heavyweight crossing to ADC, a political realignment story. Unremarkable, move on. But buried inside that same press conference was something that should have stopped every political editor in Nigeria cold. Tambuwal explained that a panel comprising political experts, practicing politicians, and professors from reputable universities was commissioned to study Nigeria's evolving political situation. The conclusion of that study was clear: both the PDP and the Labour Party may not be in a position to field strong presidential candidates in 2027. Think carefully about what he is describing. This is not a reactive response to a crisis that emerged. This is a proactive study, commissioned, structured, academic in its framing, designed to map Nigeria's opposition landscape and identify vulnerabilities. He is describing political intelligence work, and he is saying it started over 2 years ago. Then he went further. He alleged that efforts were being made to weaken the PDP and the Labour Party to the level of smaller parties, the kind that negotiate with whoever is in power at the center during elections, and that one of the explicit conditions of this plan was that Peter Obi must not remain in the Labour Party to contest. Now here is the fact that reframes everything. When Tambuwal made that statement, Peter Obi had already left the Labour Party 3 months earlier, on December 31, 2025, and at that defection event in Enugu, Tambuwal himself was in attendance. So when Tambuwal says there was a plan to remove Peter Obi, he is not speaking as an outside observer. He is speaking as someone who was inside the rooms where the response to that plan was being constructed. That is a fundamentally different kind of testimony. The historical context here matters. Nigeria has seen this playbook before. In 2014, the APC was formed by pulling key figures out of the PDP. Buhari CPC, the ACN, ANPP all merged, and it broke the PDP's 16-year stranglehold on power. What Tambuwal is describing in 2024 to 2026 is the same tactic applied in reverse, not building an alternative party, but systematically degrading the opposition platforms that already exist, so that by 2027 they cannot mount a challenge. And someone planned this 2 years in advance. To understand what Tambuwal is alleging, you need to understand how the Labour Party's internal collapse actually unfolded. Not the version where it's just politicians fighting for positions, the structural version, because the mechanism matters. After the Labour Party's strong performance in 2023, the party's crisis stemmed primarily from a leadership dispute between two men, Lamidi Apapa and Julius Abure. Both claimed the national chairmanship. The impasse triggered factionalization, and then it triggered something more consequential, a cascade of defections largely to the ruling All Progressives Congress. By 2025, courts were ruling on Julius Abure's tenure. The Supreme Court disqualified him as national chairman. INEC, however, continued to recognize him. Meanwhile, Lamidi Apapa insisted his chairmanship fell to him as the most senior working committee member. And a third faction, a caretaker committee backed by Peter Obi and Abia Governor Alex Otti, said neither of them had legitimacy. 3 simultaneous claims to the same party structure. Every institutional function of the party paralyzed. But the most significant institutional data point in this story is not a court ruling. It is a photograph. In July 2025, FCT Minister Nyesom Wike hosted Julius Abure at his Abuja residence, confirmed by Nyesom Wike's Ulin aide. No agenda disclosed, just photos. A minister in the APC-led federal government hosting the disputed chairman of the Labour Party at his private residence. The caretaker committee faction, backed by Peter Obi and Abia Governor Alex Otti, described the meeting as a betrayal of the party's values, and they asked the question that deserves to be asked loudly. Whose agenda was Julius Abure actually serving? Because here is the constitutional and political geometry you need to hold in your mind. Wike is a PDP member serving inside the APC-led federal government. His own party has accused him of being the mastermind of the PDP's internal crisis. And now his fingerprints are on the Labour Party's internal stalemate as well. A rights group, Huriwa, alleged it directly that Abure's refusal to vacate his position despite legal and constitutional challenge was being propped up by external forces within the executive arm of government, and that the APC was using Julius Abure to stifle the Labour Party's ability to function as a credible opposition. On paper, INEC has the authority to recognize party leadership based on its own determination of legitimate structure. In practice and in Nigerian political history, that determination can be influenced by which faction a sitting federal minister has decided to back. The ambiguity between a court ruling and INEC recognition creates exactly the kind of institutional gray zone in which a party can be held in suspended animation indefinitely. What checks exist? Party members can go to court. They did. What happened in practice? Between 2024 and early 2026, the Labour Party lost almost all its members in the Senate and the House of Representatives to the APC and the ADC. The party structure became too weak to contest effectively. And there is one figure that keeps appearing across every document, every decision point, every defection in this collapse. A figure whose relationship to both the FCT infrastructure and to the Labour Party's internal chairman deserves far more closer scrutiny than it has received. That connection and exactly what it means for 2027 becomes clearest when you trace the money and the timing. Let's be precise about the strategic landscape, because this is where Tambuwal's allegation moves from political gossip to structural architecture. The plan he is describing, weakening both PDP and Labour parties simultaneously, serves one primary purpose. It ensures that in 2027, any challenger to Bola Tinubu faces fragmented opposition votes spread across multiple platforms, none of which has the institutional capacity to run a nationwide ground operation at the scale the ACP can deploy. Political analyst Kunle Okunade described the Labour Party's destabilization as, and I'm paraphrasing carefully, a deliberate attempt by certain forces using party chieftains to weaken the party after its strong showing in 2023. Think about what that 2023 showing actually represented. Obi won Lagos, came second in the North Central, ran competitive numbers in states where a Labour Party candidate had never previously registered a presence. The party broke the ethnic voting template that had defined Nigerian elections since 1999. A candidate bypassed the traditional block arithmetic and won votes on a cross-regional basis. That is precisely why it had to be neutralized. Not because the ACP feared losing specifically to Obi, but because Obi's 2023 performance had demonstrated that the template itself could be broken. And that was the more dangerous discovery. So, who benefits from Obi being removed from Labour Party? The immediate answer is whoever controls ADC's presidential ticket selection process. The coalition that formed around ADC includes former Vice President Atiku Abubakar, former Kaduna Governor Nasir El-Rufai, former Rivers Governor Rotimi Amechi, ADC National Chairman David Mark, former Senate President, a Benue man with enormous institutional influence over how party structures are assembled, and he was present at Obi's defection event in Enugu. These are figures who each carry regional bloc weight. In any presidential primary within ADC, the question of zoning, whether the ticket goes north or south, becomes the central battleground. And here is the critical distinction. Peter Obi as an ADC candidate is a fundamentally different proposition than Peter Obi as a Labour Party candidate. In Labour Party, he was the founder of a movement. The party was built around his candidacy. The obedient base answered directly to him. In ADC, he is one member of a coalition board that includes Atiku, El-Rufai, and Amechi, each with competing presidential ambitions or the ability to influence who gets the ticket. Whether Obi will be ADC's presidential candidate, whether he will be offered a vice presidential slot in an Atiku-led ticket, or whether he will be sidelined altogether in ADC's internal power negotiations, that question is live and unresolved. Now, the silent stakeholders are instructive. Alex Otti, the only Labour Party governor who ran Obi's Southeast network in 2023, remains in the Labour Party. He has not followed Obi to ADC. His silence on whether he will support Obi's presidential bid from within LP or join the ADC structure is itself a political signal. And Dati Baba Ahmed, Obi's 2023 running mate, declared his own presidential ambition on January 7, 2026, under the Labour Party banner. Now, follow the money. In August 2025, the EFCC detained Aminu Tambuwal over alleged fraudulent cash withdrawals totaling 189 billion naira during his time as Sokoto governor. Atiku Abubakar condemned the detention publicly, stating the only reason the EFCC had detained Tambuwal was because he was a member of the opposition coalition. And the ADC itself alleged that EFCC summons to senior coalition members were politically motivated and linked directly to their political affiliations. The EFCC dismissed the claim, said no investigation is statute barred. Now, here's the pattern to watch here. In Nigerian political history, the EFCC has never been accused of being a neutral institution. It was weaponized under Obasanjo against Atiku, under Buhari against Saraki. Each time, the agency's defenders said the investigations were legitimate. Each time, the timing spoke louder than the justification. The pattern to watch here is not individual arrests, it is timing correlation. Do EFCC summons cluster around periods of opposition coalition consolidation, around ADC primary scheduling, around approaching 2027 registration deadlines? If yes, that correlation becomes a structural pattern of political intimidation, not coincidence. But here is what almost nobody has connected yet, and it changes the entire picture. The question is not just whether there was a plan to remove Obi from Labour Party. The deeper question is this: is Obi's move to ADC the defeat of that plan, or is it the most sophisticated phase?
If Tambuwal's allegation is accurate, and nothing in the factual record contradicts it, then what Nigeria is witnessing is not normal political competition. It is the engineering of a one-party state by proxy. Tambuwal said it explicitly. When their group projected into the future, they saw clear signs that the APC administration might want to turn Nigeria into a one-party state. Consider the numbers. Between 2024 and early 2026, the PDP lost 10 of its 12 governors to the APC through a cascade of defections. The party that governed Nigeria for 16 years and still commanded 12 governors after 2013 now has 2. Labour Party has lost almost all its National Assembly members. The combined effect is this. Tinubu enters the 2027 election cycle with the APC controlling the overwhelming majority of state resources, state election logistics, and state media machinery across the country. For the federal balance, this is a structural problem. Nigeria's federalism relies on a functioning opposition that can win governorships in states. Because governors control INEC logistics at the state level, they control the state independent electoral commissions for local government elections, they control the security architecture that protects or suppresses voters. A lawyer named Sunday Ugochi put it directly. The Labour Party as it stands is dead and cannot compete. And he added the warning that should be on the front page of every newspaper in this country. This is exactly what those who perceived it as a threat wanted. And what it points toward is the entrenchment of a one-party system. Now, return to the figure I flagged earlier. Nyesom Wike, the FTT minister, the PDP member sitting inside the APC cabinet, the man whose infrastructure sits at the intersection of the PDP crisis, the Labour Party crisis, and the pipeline of defections to APC. A political analyst, Dare Glynstone Akinye, stated it directly. The APC was behind the internal crisis rocking both Labour Party and PDP, operating through the FTT minister to destabilize the PDP from within. What that connection means is this. A single political operator sitting inside the federal cabinet appears to have functioned as the coordinating mechanism for disabling both major opposition vehicles simultaneously. That is not factional politics, that is architectural demolition. And here's the data point that lands hardest. The Labour Party's performance in FTT area council elections underscored the practical human cost of its internal crisis. The party was unable to convert its once energized youth support base into electoral victories. The momentum generated during the 2023 presidential election, the most organically driven political movement this country had seen in a generation, had by 2026 been converted from a voter registration machine into a social media discussion group. That is not natural decay. That is managed collapse.
Nigeria's 2023 election drew unusual international attention precisely because of what Peter Obi represented structurally. A candidate running on anti-corruption, fiscal discipline, and policy competence in the world's largest black nation. That narrative had value beyond Nigeria's borders. It resonated with international financial institutions who have long expressed frustration with Nigeria's governance deficits. It resonated with Western governments who watch Nigeria as the bellwether for West African democratic stability. And it resonated with diaspora Nigerians who had spent years watching their home country's politics with a mixture of anger and exhaustion. The IMF, World Bank, and bilateral creditors all have active engagements with Nigeria's debt management and fiscal reform agenda. A politically weakened opposition means reduced public accountability pressure on whatever economic policy direction the next election cycle produces. That matters for Nigeria's debt renegotiation prospects, for its relationship with the African Development Bank, and for investor confidence in the rule of law. Because one of the things international investors price into Nigerian risk assessments is political contestability, the question of whether there is a credible mechanism for leadership change through elections. The ECC's use against ADC coalition members also has an international dimension. Nigeria's anti-corruption architecture, the ECC specifically, receives technical and capacity support from international partners, including the US Department of Justice and the UK National Crime Agency. When that architecture is perceived as being deployed selectively against political opponents, while ACP-aligned officials face no equivalent scrutiny, it creates a credibility problem for those international partnerships that those partners will eventually have to answer publicly. For Nigerians in the diaspora, this is personal.
Diaspora remittances form one of the most critical foreign exchange inflows into Nigeria's economy. Diaspora Nigerians were among the most vocal obedient movement supporters in 2023, and diaspora communities are increasingly being targeted by Nigerian political actors as fundraising and legitimacy-building networks. What Tambuwal's revelation means for you is simple. The platform you supported in 2023 was targeted for elimination before you cast your vote. Understanding the architecture of that targeting is not optional analysis. It is the prerequisite for building anything durable in 2027. What I'm about to show you now is where this story becomes truly dangerous, because it requires examining the strongest counter-argument, the one that many of Peter Obi's own supporters are currently making, and then explaining with precision why it doesn't hold.
Let me present the strongest counter-argument to everything Tambuwal is alleging, and I want to present it fairly because it deserves a direct answer. The argument goes like this. Peter Obi left Labour Party of his own free will. He was already participating in ADC coalition meetings throughout 2025. At his own defection event, Obi said, and I want to be precise here, that his declaration for ADC was not really a defection, because from the beginning he had been part of every meeting and discussion for the formation of the coalition that coalesced into ADC. So the claim is that nobody removed Peter Obi, he chose to leave. Tambuwal is providing political cover for people who saw an opportunity to join a better positioned platform and are now dressing it up as principled resistance to a conspiracy. That argument is coherent and it deserves a direct answer. The question of whether Obi chose to leave Labour Party is entirely compatible with the question of whether that choice was manufactured for him. A man pushed to the edge of a cliff who steps off has technically jumped. The mechanism that matters is the one that moved him to the edge, and that mechanism is exactly what Tambuwal is describing. The Supreme Court had disqualified Julius Abure as chairman. INEC continued to recognize him. This institutional contradiction, a court ruling in one direction, a regulatory body recognizing the opposite result, does not happen by accident in Nigerian politics. INEC's administrative decisions on party recognition exist within a political environment where the Commission's chairman is appointed by the President and confirmed by the Senate. The question of who controlled INEC's determination during the Labour Party crisis has not been sufficiently examined. It should be. Now, let me correct the three biggest misconceptions Nigerians have about this story. First misconception, that the Labour Party's collapse is primarily the personal ambitions of Julius Abure. Abure is an instrument in this story, not an architect. The more important question is whose interest his position served, and the photograph with Wike answers that question directionally, even if not definitively. A chairman who meets privately with a federal minister aligned to the opposite party while refusing to vacate a position the Supreme Court has ruled he no longer holds is not acting purely on personal ambition. He is acting in someone else's interest. Second misconception, that the ADC coalition is a genuine unified opposition with a coherent governance agenda. The ADC coalition includes figures from PDP, Labour Party, and former APC affiliates. Some of these figures were themselves part of the APC government in various capacities. The idea that Atiku Abubakar, Nasir El-Rufai, Rotimi Amaichi, and Peter Obi share a coherent governance vision is a claim that deserves scrutiny, not assumption. A coalition of rival presidential ambitions is not an opposition. It is a holding company for competing interests. Third misconception, that Tinubu's administration actively directed the opposition's collapse. The more precise argument, the one supported by the documented evidence, is that certain political operators within or adjacent to the APC created the conditions for collapse, and the administration benefited from and declined to prevent that collapse. That is a meaningful distinction for democratic accountability, because it is harder to prove direct direction, but it is fully visible in the pattern of institutional decisions. And here is the piece of evidence that both sides have completely missed.
When Peter Obi left the Labour Party, the Abure faction's response was to call his exit a liberation and then to publicly apologize to Nigerians for having presented him as their flag bearer in 2023. A party chairman faction publicly apologizing for its own presidential candidate after his departure. That tells you everything you need to know about where that faction's loyalty was located. It was never to the candidate, it was never to the movement, it was to whoever controlled the party structure from outside. Now, if what I just told you surprises you, drop a comment below. I want to know what you think before we get to the part that changes everything.
3 most likely next moves and what Nigerians should be watching for. First, the ADC ticket battle. The most consequential political development of the next 6 months will not be a rally. It will not be a defection announcement. It will be the internal negotiations over who gets ADC's 2027 presidential ticket. Peter Obi is in ADC. Atiku Abubakar is in ADC. Nasir El-Rufai is in ADC. David Mark chairs ADC. The zoning debate, whether the ticket goes north or south, will determine whether the coalition holds or fractures along the same ethnic fault lines that Nigerian opposition always fractures on. Watch specifically for any sudden change in Atiku's positioning on zoning. And watch whether Alex Otti moves from the Labour Party to ADC in the coming months. Otti's decision will signal whether the Southeast Power Bloc is confident that Obi will lead the ADC ticket or whether they are hedging their bets. Second, continued ECCF pressure on ADC coalition members. The pattern to watch is not individual arrests, it is timing correlation. Do ECCF summons cluster around periods of coalition consolidation, around ADC primary schedulings, around approaching 2027 registration deadlines? If that correlation holds consistently, it becomes a structural pattern of political intimidation, regardless of the legal merits of individual cases. Third, the Labour Party question. Do not write off the Labour Party entirely. Dati Baba Ahmed has declared his presidential intention under the Labour Party. Alex Otti's governorship gives the party a functioning state machinery in Abia State. If the Labour Party resolves its leadership crisis and fields a Southeast presidential candidate in 2027, even a long-shot candidacy, it splits the Southeast vote between ADC and LP, which benefits the APC in a 3-way race. That is not an accident if it happens. It's the completion of the same fragmentation strategy Tambuwal described. What would escalation look like? A scenario where Peter Obi does not secure the ADC presidential ticket, withdraws from the coalition, either returns to Labour or launches a new platform, creating a 4-way fragmentation: APC, ADC under Atiku, LP under Dati or Otti, and an Obi-affiliated platform. That scenario is the one the architects of the opposition's collapse would most want to see, because in a 4-way race, the incumbent wins without needing a majority. What would de-escalation require? A binding ADC primary, credibly administered with a transparent dispute resolution mechanism, one that settles the presidential ticket question before 2027 primaries begin. And it requires the obedient movement to make a cold-blooded strategic assessment, whether their energy is better deployed inside a coalition they do not control, or whether they build an independent voter registration and civic monitoring infrastructure that functions regardless of which platform Peter Obi eventually runs on. Now, the question that opened this analysis. If the plan to remove Peter Obi from the Labour Party started 2 years ago, who drew it up? Who executed it, and are they still in place? Based on everything documented here, the answer is this. The plan did not require a single offer. It required 3 interlocking conditions: a party chairman willing to remain in position despite legal challenge, an institutional body willing to recognize that chairman despite court rulings, and a political operator with access and influence to coordinate both. The evidence points directionally towards Abure as the instrument, INEC's recognition decisions as the institutional lever, and Wike's Abuja infrastructure as the political bridge. None of those three conditions has been removed, which means whatever platform Peter Obi is now on, the capacity to apply the same playbook has not been dismantled.
Tambuwal said the conditions of the plan were that Peter Obi must not remain in Labour Party to contest. That condition has been met. Obi is in ADC. Labour Party is in ruins. PDP has 2 governors, and the ruling party is heading into 2027 with state resources, incumbent advantage, and a fragmented opposition. The measured conclusion is this: what Tambuwal described is consistent with the documented institutional record. The Labour Party's crisis was not organic. The timing of the EFC interventions is not coincidental. The photograph of Abure with Wike is not explained by a courtesy call. And the collapse of the most organically mobilized political movement Nigeria has seen since the era of Gani Fawehinyi did not happen because young Nigerians lost interest. It happened because the institutional levers that could sustain or destroy a party were pulled in a specific direction at a specific time by people who had studied the landscape carefully and acted before the opposition knew what was happening. The question I want you to take to the comments is this: given everything you now know, is the ADC the answer to the plan Tambuwal described, or is it the plan's most sophisticated phase? If this analysis gave you clarity, share it with one person who needs to understand what is really happening in Nigeria. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.